My sister stood in my living room with a moving checklist in her hand and said, "Mom and Dad agree this is fair, and Jake voted yes too, so I'm taking the master bedroom. You and Ryan can use the guest room until you find something smaller." She said it like she was doing me a favor. If you've ever had family try to vote their way into your house, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because you're going to want to see how this ended. My name is Emma. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a property manager for a commercial real estate firm. My husband Ryan is 36 and works in IT security. We bought our house 3 years ago after saving for 7 years straight. The day that changed everything was March 9th, 2024, when my family held what my mother called an emergency family meeting at my parents' house, and I discovered they'd taken a vote on my property without me. But let me back up, because this didn't come out of nowhere. When I was 12 and my sister Mallory was 9, my parents gave me a jewelry box for Christmas. I loved it. It had a little ballerina that spun when you opened the lid. On December 27th, Mallory decided she wanted it. She cried through dinner. My dad came into my room that night and said, "You're the older one, Emma. You need to be generous. Mallory really loves that jewelry box." I gave it up. That jewelry box sat on Mallory's dresser for 6 years. She never put anything in it. When I was 22, I saved up $2,400 to spend a semester studying abroad in Spain. I'd worked 2 jobs. I had the payments scheduled. 3 weeks before my departure, Mallory's car died. She was 19 and had wrecked 2 cars already. My parents couldn't afford another one, they said. My mother called me and said, "Family helps family, Emma. Mallory needs a car to get to work. You can study abroad any time." I gave her the money. Mallory quit that job 5 weeks later. She never paid me back. I never made it to Spain. When I got engaged to Ryan, my parents offered to contribute $3,000 to the wedding. We planned around that number. Then Mallory decided to go back to school for the 4th time. My dad called and said, "Your sister is really trying to turn things around. Education is important. You and Ryan have good jobs. You understand, right?" We paid for our own wedding. Mallory dropped out after 1 semester. So when my mom called on March 8th and said there was a family meeting to discuss a situation involving Mallory, I already felt that old familiar weight in my stomach. I arrived at my parents' house at 6:30 p.m. Ryan had a work deadline and stayed home. The dining room table was set like this was a formal occasion. My parents sat on one side. Mallory sat on the other with a notebook in front of her. My older brother Jake was on speakerphone from 2 states away. My mom started. She said, "Thank you for coming, Emma. We need to discuss Mallory's housing situation." Mallory's lease was ending, I knew that. She'd been renting a 1-bedroom apartment that our parents had been supplementing for the past year because she kept getting fired or quitting jobs. My dad jumped in. He said, "Your mother and I can't keep paying Mallory's rent. We're retiring next year and we need to think about our future." I nodded. That seemed reasonable. I waited for Mallory to say she'd found a cheaper place or was moving in with a roommate. Instead, my mother said, "So we've been talking as a family, and we think the best solution is for Mallory to move into your house." I blinked. I said, "Excuse me?" Mallory pushed her notebook toward me. She said, "I made a floor plan. You and Ryan don't have kids. You have 3 bedrooms. I really only need 1, but I'd like to use the den as an office space for when I start my online business." I stared at the notebook. She'd drawn out my house. She'd labeled rooms. She'd written Mallory's room on the master bedroom and Mallory's office on the den that Ryan used for gaming and his home server setup. I said, "You want to move into my house?" My dad said, "We took a family vote, Emma. Democracy. Jake voted yes. Your mother and I voted yes. It's 3-1. From the speakerphone, Jake said, "It just makes sense, Em. You've got the space." I looked at my mother. I said, "You voted on my house. The house that Ryan and I own." My mom did this thing she always does. She sighed like I was being difficult. She said, "We're family. Family takes care of each other. You have more than enough room and Mallory needs help right now." Mallory leaned forward. She said, I already gave notice at my apartment. I move out April 1st. That gives you 3 weeks to get the room ready. I'd like it painted. Maybe a soft gray. Also, I have a cat now, so you'll need to be okay with that. That's when something cracked open inside me. Not anger yet. Clarity. I said, who's on the deed to my house? My dad frowned. He said, what does that have to do with anything? I said it slowly. I said, who is on the deed to the house on 428 Maple Street? Mallory rolled her eyes. She said, you and Ryan, obviously, but I stood up. I said, then you're not moving in. There's no vote. You don't get a say in property you don't own. My mother's face went hard. She said, Emma Louise, sit down. We are trying to help your sister. I said, then you help her. She can move in with you. My dad said, we don't have the space. We're downsizing. I said, that sounds like a personal problem. I left. My phone started ringing before I even got to my car. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Ryan and told him everything. He stared at me. He said, they voted. On our house. I said 3-1. He said, they know I exist, right? I'm on the deed. I'm your husband. That's at least 3-2, and also none of them get a vote. I pulled up our deed on my laptop. We'd bought the house in both our names. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. I'd handled enough property documents at work to know exactly what that meant. It meant both of us owned it equally. It meant nobody moved in without both our names on a lease or agreement. It meant my family's vote was worth less than the paper it wasn't even written on. Ryan said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to make it extremely clear that this is not happening. Over the next 2 days, I put together what I started calling Operation Deed Drop. I made copies of our deed. I printed our mortgage statements showing both our names. I screenshotted our property tax records. I pulled the listing from when we'd bought the house. I compiled every piece of documentation that proved ownership. Then I called my friend Nadia. She's a real estate attorney, and she'd helped us with our closing 3 years ago. I met her for coffee on March 11th. I explained the situation. Nadia stared at me over her latte. She said, your family held a vote to move your adult sister into your privately owned home without asking you first. I said, correct. She said, Emma, I've known you for 6 years. I've watched you set yourself on fire to keep your family warm. Please tell me you're not actually considering this. I said I'm not. I need to know what my legal standing is if she tries to move in anyway. Nadia pulled out her phone and started taking notes. She said, if she shows up and tries to enter without your permission, it's trespassing. If she gets mail delivered there or tries to establish residency, you can file for an emergency eviction, but it's easier to just never let her in the door. Do not give her a key. Do not let her stay even one night. Once she's in, tenant laws get complicated. I felt my spine straighten. I said, so I just say no. Nadia said, you own the house. You say no. If they show up anyway, you call the police for trespassing. It's that simple. Simple, it sounded simple. But I knew my family. Simple wasn't in their vocabulary when Mallory wanted something. I called my Aunt Jeannie that afternoon. She's my dad's older sister and the only family member who'd ever called out my parents' favoritism. She lives in Florida now and we don't talk often. But when I told her about the vote, she laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. She said, of course they did. Emma, your parents have been doing this your whole life. They've been using your guilt like a credit card and never paying the bill. I said, Aunt Jeannie, I don't know how to make them understand that this is different. She said, show them the deed and stop explaining. You don't owe them a dissertation on property rights. You owe them nothing. On March 14th, my mother added me to a group chat with her, my dad, Jake, and Mallory. The first message was a link to a U-Haul reservation for March 30th. My mom wrote, Mallory's move-in day. Emma, please make sure the room is ready. Also, we'll need your garage code for the furniture. I screenshotted it. Then I typed my response. I wrote, Mallory is not moving into my house. There will be no move-in day. If anyone shows up with a truck, you will be turned away. The chat exploded. Mallory wrote, Are you serious right now? I already gave notice. Where am I supposed to go? Jake wrote, Emma, don't be selfish. It's temporary. My dad wrote, We are coming over tomorrow to discuss this in person. Be home at 10 a.m. I wrote, No, you are not coming over. This is not a discussion. The answer is no. My mom called me 6 times in a row. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. She said, You are being incredibly selfish and hurtful. Your sister is going to be homeless because of you. I don't know how you sleep at night. Ryan was reading over my shoulder. He said, Do you want me to respond? I said, No. I want to be very clear that this is coming from both of us. I typed one more message in the group chat. I wrote, The house at 428 Maple Street is owned jointly by Ryan Mitchell and Emma Mitchell. No one else has legal claim or decision-making authority over this property. Mallory, you have 3 weeks to find other housing. I suggest you start looking. Then I muted the chat. March 15th. My dad showed up at my office. The receptionist called me. She said, Emma, there's a gentleman here who says he's your father. He doesn't have an appointment. I went to the lobby. My dad stood there in his jacket and his disappointed face. He said, You won't answer your phone. You won't let us come over. What choice do I have? I kept my voice level. I said, Dad, I'm at work. You can't ambush me here. He said, Then talk to me. Your sister needs help. I said, Mallory is 31 years old. She can figure out her own housing. He said, You have the room, Emma. Why are you being so stubborn? I said, It's my house. That's the only reason I need. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. He said, A family is supposed to mean something. I said, It does. That's why I've given Mallory over $10,000 in the past 9 years. That's why I gave up Spain. That's why I paid for my own wedding. I've been family dad. Now I'm being a homeowner. Those things don't overlap here. He left. I went back to my desk and my hands were shaking, but I felt something else too. I felt solid. The days crawled toward March 30th. Mallory kept posting on social media about family betrayal and having nowhere to go. My mom sent me articles about sibling estrangement and family loyalty. Jake sent me a long text about how I was being cruel and how he was disappointed in me. I didn't argue. I just repeated the same line. Mallory is not moving into our house. On March 28th, Ryan installed a video doorbell. We'd been talking about it for months, but he expedited it. He said, just in case. Just in case was smart. March 30th arrived. I took the day off work. Ryan worked from home. At 9:47 a.m., our new doorbell camera sent an alert. A U-Haul truck was parking in front of our house. I watched on my phone. Mallory got out of the passenger side. My parents got out of the cab. Jake wasn't there, but he'd sent his vote from across the country, so that felt fitting. The doorbell rang. I opened the door but left the screen door latched. I said, You need to leave. My mom said, Emma, enough. Let your sister in. We have furniture to unload. Mallory was already crying. She said, I can't believe you're doing this to me. I said, Mallory, I told you 2 weeks ago that you are not moving in. You chose not to believe me. That's your problem. My dad said, Open the door right now. I held up my phone. On the screen was a PDF of the deed. I said, This is the deed to this property. You'll notice 2 names, mine and Ryan's. You'll notice your names are not on it. That means you have no legal right to be here. My mom tried the screen door. It was locked. She said, This is ridiculous. We're family. Ryan appeared behind me. He said, And this is our house. Emma told you the answer. You need to leave now. My dad's face went red. He said, You're turning my daughter against her own family. Ryan said, No, you're ignoring her boundaries and facing the consequences. Mallory pushed forward. She said, I have nowhere to go. You're going to make me homeless. I said, You've had 3 weeks to find a place. That's not my emergency. My mom said, "If you don't open this door, you are out of this family." That landed differently than she thought it would. I said, "If being in this family means giving up my home, then I guess I'm out." My dad said, "You don't mean that." I said, "I have a folder on my counter. Inside is a timeline of every time I've given money or opportunities to Mallory. It totals $11,300 over 9 years. I have receipts. I have bank transfers. I also have a copy of this deed, our mortgage, and a statement from our attorney about property rights and trespassing law. If that truck is not gone in 10 minutes, I'm calling the police." My mother laughed. It was sharp. She said, "You'd call the police on your own family." I said, "I'd call the police on someone trespassing." "You're choosing which one you are." Ryan set a timer on his phone. He held it up to the glass. He said, 10 minutes. They stared at us. Mallory was full-on sobbing now. My dad looked like he wanted to break the door down. My mom looked like she'd bitten into something rotten. At minute 7, my dad said, "Let's go." Mallory said, "No, Dad, we can't just..." My dad said, "We're going, now." They walked back to the U-Haul. My mom turned back once. She said, "You're going to regret this." I said, "I really don't think I will." They drove away. I closed the door. Ryan and I stood in the hallway. My legs felt wobbly. Ryan said, "You okay?" I said, "I think so." He said, "That was the hardest thing I've ever watched you do." I said, "That was the easiest no I've ever given." The fallout was immediate and ongoing. My mother blocked me on social media. My dad sent me one text. It said, "When you come to your senses, we'll talk." I didn't reply. Jake called me 2 days later. He said, "Mallory's staying on a friend's couch. Mom and Dad are furious. Was this really worth it?" I said, "Yes." He said, "It's just a room, Emma." I said, "It's my house, Jake. If it's just a room, why didn't you offer yours?" He was quiet. Then he said, "I don't have space." I said, "Neither do I. Not for someone who's never respected me." He said, "That's harsh." I said, "It's honest. I need to go." I found out later through Aunt Jeannie that Mallory moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate she found on Craigslist. My parents gave her first and last month's rent. Total cost to them was $1,900, less than they'd spent supplementing her old place for even 3 months. 2 months went by. Mother's Day came. I sent my mom a card. She didn't respond. Father's Day, same thing. In July, Jake called again. He said Mom's birthday is next month. She's turning 65. "Are you going to come to the party?" I said, "Am I invited?" He said, "You're her daughter." I said, "That's not an answer." He sighed. He said, "Dad says you're welcome if you apologize." I said, "For what? Owning my house?" Jake said, "For hurting Mallory." I said, "Tell them I said happy birthday." "I won't be there." I didn't go. Aunt Jeannie called me after and said Mallory spent the whole party talking about how I'd abandoned her. She said my mom cried. She said my dad gave a speech about how some people forget where they came from. Aunt Jeannie also said, "I told your father he raised you to be independent and then got mad when you acted like it." He didn't like that. In October, 6 months after the U-Haul incident, Ryan and I had the house to ourselves on a Saturday morning. We were drinking coffee on the porch. The brass numbers we'd mounted beside the door caught the light. We'd installed them ourselves the week we moved in. 4, 2, 8. Ryan saw me looking. He said, "You know what I'm proud of?" I said, "What?" He said, "That number is ours. No one else's." I said, "It's a good number." He said, "Have you thought about reaching out to them?" I said, "Sometimes." Then I remember how they didn't ask. They voted. They decided. They never once thought about what Ryan and I might want or need. And I think, why would I go back to that? Ryan nodded. He said, "I support whatever you decide. But I like our life without people who don't respect you." In November, Mallory sent me a friend request on social media. I didn't accept or decline. I let it sit. In December, my mom sent a Christmas card. It was addressed to both Ryan and me. Inside, she'd written, "We miss you. Love, Mom and Dad. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just missing me." I thought about it for 3 days. Then I sent a card back. I wrote, "Ryan and I would be open to meeting for coffee in the new year if you're willing to respect our boundaries. No expectations either way." My dad called on December 30th. He said, "Your mother and I can meet you on January 8th. There's a cafe near us." I said, "Okay." He said, "Mallory wants to come." I said, "No, just you and Mom. If we rebuild this, we do it in steps." He didn't like that. But he said, "Fine." We met. It was stiff. My mom cried a little. My dad said he didn't understand why I'd been so hardline. I said, "Because you didn't ask. You decided for me. That's not how adults treat each other." My mom said, "We thought you'd want to help." I said, "Helping is offering. Volunteering someone else's house is not helping. It's overstepping." We didn't fix everything that day, but my dad said, "We didn't see it that way." I said, "I know. That's the problem." We meet for coffee now once a month. We don't talk about Mallory's housing. We don't talk about the vote. My mom asks about work. My dad asks about the house. It's shallow, but it's civil. Mallory and I don't speak. I'm not sure we will. Some bridges burn for a reason. But here's what I learned. Family doesn't get to vote on your life. They don't get to decide what you owe or what you share. Love is not the same as access, and loyalty is not the same as surrender. I spent 20 years being generous, pliable, understanding. It never earned me respect. It earned me more requests. The deed had our names. That was the only vote that mattered. If this story made you think about your own boundaries with family or property or people who think they get a say in your life, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about standing your ground. And share this if you know someone who needs to hear that no is a complete sentence.